Big round of applause for Tim McBride. Kent, ATA. Kent, ATA. All right, just in case you forgot his name is Kent, and he's at the ATA. Our next speaker is really a gentleman who is pushing hard for the rights of parents. And I know for the God-fearing people that are here that you feel that it is your right as a parent, under the eyes of God, that you have the absolute authority over your child, which I totally agree with. But you have to realize that there are creeping agendas. The again, UN something or other, whatever that was, unsustainable. I thought that was so relevant. But you got to realize that where we're going now, sometimes the obvious needs to be pointed out. Kent at the ATA. I won't mispronounce Kent's name ever again. Please join me in welcoming Mr. John Hilton-O'Brien for Parents for Choice in Education. Now, John is a philosopher. That is why we are going to start a clock. And at 22 minutes, I will hold up the sign that says John 22 minutes. He is a captivating speaker. He has so much wealth and knowledge, but it can go on a long time. But it's incredibly informative. So I'll get off the stage. John, take it away.
Thank you, Daryl. A friend of mine was standing on her doorstep and she saw a couple of children going by on the sidewalk. There was a girl about age 14, a boy about age 13, and the girl was trying to explain to the boy what pansexual meant, because they'd been taking it up in school. But that wasn't really what interested her. What really caught her notice was the much younger girl a dozen paces back, who was skipping along, and she clearly wanted their attention. She wanted to be part of the group. And she was saying, "I'm bi, 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 bi." Now, we can learn a few things about that. Please advance a couple of, there we go, advance one more, please. There we go. So we can understand a couple of things from this. And the first thing that we can understand is that when you do comprehensive sex education, it's not a scalpel. It's a sledgehammer. You're not getting that particular kid in that particular class. And you know, we're going to come back to it, but that's dangerous. It's going to get all of the kids, and there's going to be unforeseen consequences. So in this talk today, I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to talk about some of the other culture wars issues, okay? I'm then going to turn to what I think of as the real problems, the underlying issue, and I'm going to wrap up by talking about what we can do. And every so often you'll see me go like this, which is a sign to advance the slide, or this, when I think it's gone a little too far. So that sex education thing. The American Psychological Association tells us that they did a specific study on sexualization when it came up some years ago in the context of sexuality in the cinema and on television. And they said that it's very harmful. In effect, they said, it has the same effect as child abuse. And in fact, when you see comprehensive sex education done, it becomes a little harder to sort out the kids that are actually being abused sexually from those who simply have gotten too much information in the classroom. And in fact, it develops a situation that's rather similar to gender dysphoria. In other words, we're creating the very situation that we're trying to solve. And it isn't just what's going on in the classrooms either. As Action for Canada has pointed out, there are in fact books that are sexually explicit in school classrooms, in school libraries. Those two books up there are from Action for Canada's list, and our volunteers have found them in Calgary Public Libraries, Calgary Public School Boards, school libraries in this city. Those are on the shelves. And yes, they are sexually explicit. So, part of what I have to tell you about this, and I'll return to this, is that the people who want to talk about gender dysphoria in the classroom, the people who want to get into children's heads to adjust their identity, are teachers. They're not social workers. I'm a social worker by trade, although I'm no longer registered. And it's my profession that mostly deals with this sort of deep counseling, and I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. For starters, I'd need 2 more years of education. I'd need to have at least an MSW, and 3,000 practice hours, supervised practice hours, before I could dream of doing the sort of psychotherapy that's needed here. If I was in psychology, I would need to have a PhD plus 3,000 hours of supervised practice time. Competence is an issue here. The people who want to talk about this stuff are not competent to deliver the services they're talking about. Let's move on. So, we mentioned the PRISM toolkits. You know, they come in elementary and secondary editions in Alberta. And here's the most important part. This is what they tell you. You know that law that says if you're going to teach about sexuality, gender, and religion in the classroom, you have to inform parents and get their consent? Yeah. The law says no such fool thing. What the law actually says is this: if and only if the primary stated purpose of that lesson is to talk about gender, sexuality, or religion, then and only then do you need to inform parents, let alone get their consent. And the rest of the book is full of lesson plans in which the stated purpose is one thing. The contents, however, are all about sexuality and gender. My favorite is the one for a high school religion class that is entitled, How Homophobia Leads Us into Sin. I don't think I need to elaborate any further than that. Let's move on. So, then we have secrecy policies, right? These were brought to us by Ms. Notley, but the Gay-Straight Alliances being mandatory in any school where a single child asks for them, those are still in the legislation. They're in the Education Act, section 35.1. A school club isn't subject to those reporting requirements. It doesn't matter what they do. They don't have to tell the parents they're going to talk about sexuality. And Calgary Public and roughly half of our school boards in Alberta to this day still have a secrecy policy that says all you can say is that the school has such a club. That's it. So Calgary Public, among other school boards in Alberta, is protecting teachers who are going to teach about education on sexuality, and they don't have to tell parents at all. All they have to do is run a club. So, let's move on. Oh yes. Look, I've got a confession to make. I mentioned I was a social worker by trade. In fact, I was trained by one of Saul Alinsky's disciples, if you happen to know who that is. And I use critical theory whenever I'm practicing. because here's what critical theory was meant for. It tells me that, say I'm a principal in a school, and I have a student whose mother is recently divorced, well, maybe not even that recently, but her husband was physically abusive to her and in fact did jail time for it. And she is the custodial parent. She's been abused, and I'm not going to duplicate the circumstances. So I'm not going to sit there and lecture her, right? I'm certainly not going to bring in her husband to support me and tell her how wrong she is. I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to try to give her power over her life. And I'm going to be listening to her. I won't duplicate that oppression. But that's not what's happening here. Critical theory is used in the classroom to say, you students, you need to give up your power. And the person saying it is the only person in the room who has any power. It's a complete abuse of critical race theory. Now, it's not that the people doing this are bad people. They don't mean to do harm. But they're not competent. This is a very high-level theory in social work and in philosophy that we're trying to adapt to people who aren't trained in those fields and are trying to adopt it on the fly in a classroom with 27 kids. And the people who are selling them on it have an agenda. So what are we getting? We're getting diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a great idea. It's a very fancy philosophical idea. And ideally, it will free people. But that's not how it's being done. What we get instead is a program. We get to pay some very special people a lot of money to have more power. And we as administrators also get power because we get to give away that budget and have these people dependent on us. This is political pornography. We are exploiting the image of vulnerable people to gain money and power for ourselves. It needs to end. So here's what it all comes down to. In Alberta right now, there are 20,000 people in home education. There's 40,000 people in private schools. There's over 10,000 people in charter schools. That's 73,000 people, a 136% rise over 20 years ago, and I assure you that our public schools have not increased in their enrollment by anything like that. What's more, when we look at charter schools, they have to keep track of how many people are on wait lists. And last time we had a look at that, there were 10,000 students in charter schools and 20,000 on the wait list. Our funding manual makes it hard for private schools to admit new people, and it's quite possible that private schools have a similar number of people waiting to get in. And I've joked in print that the only reason the public schools are still viable is that parents literally can't leave fast enough. The reason why Smith is talking about the policy she is that she has to restore trust in our institutions by parents. Okay? That's what it's about. It's not that she's some big social conservative. It's just that she's doing some statecraft because it has to be done. If we don't, we stand to lose those institutions. So what's the cause of it? Oh, wait, back one. Back one. Oh, go 2 forward, please. 2 forward. We need an elephant. We're missing an elephant. Okay. The elephant in the room is this. I guess we've somehow missed it. Just go back one, please. The elephant in the room is that Alberta's education budget is $9.8 billion with a B for 760,000 students total, including those homeschoolers who are only getting $1,800 and some for it. Maybe. Well, that means your average classroom of 27 kids is getting $345,000 as an expense. Please back the slide up one. And the teacher is earning $80,000 of that. That means we are spending less than 25% of our money on education on the actual staff. And if you can point me to a profit-making company that does a similar thing, I will drive over with all my friends and beg them to take my money as an investment because they are clearly making money hand over fist. So where's it going? And here's the answer. Calling it the blob isn't new. This is a crusading education minister from the UK called Michael Gove who came up with this one. Here's how it works. We've got the Alberta Teachers Association. We've got bureaucrats in the Ministry of Education in Edmonton, and here in Calgary Public we've got 2 levels of administration beyond the schools. We also have the faculties of education, and we have various and sundry activist organizations, some of whom can contribute to 600 phone calls and emails. So how does this work? Well, let's see. The teachers' union makes a deal with those levels of bureaucracy to get funding, not only for their teachers to get paid, but for themselves to get paid to do the training for further education. The faculties of education get in on that business because they're hired as consultants, but they're also called upon for their expertise to justify those salaries and the bureaucrats. And it's going to involve the activists, who are sometimes members of the other organizations, but they're paid as some sort of consultants for all of them. They come out to address teachers' conventions. They get brought into the bureaucracy as consultants. It's a very cozy system. These people are their own constituents. Why would a bureaucrat listen to you as a parent when he should clearly be listening to the expert in the Faculty of Education and to the person from the ATA? They're an echo chamber. They're not just an echo chamber though. That echo chamber has a lock on it and there's an armed guard out front. And they're completely stunned if a parent happens to find her way in there and start talking. And that's what's happened to us. So, I'm sure everyone has heard what a terrible job Mr. Kinney did on the curriculum. And you've heard that because the ATA spent $1.1 million as a third-party advertiser back in 2021. Why would the ATA spend $1 million on this? I mean, aside from noticing, hey, our terms of reference forbid us from endorsing a candidate or political party, but it's surprisingly quiet about opposing one. Well, there's a reason. There's actually 3 reasons. The first is that Ms. Notley had made them a deal. She signed a memorandum of understanding that said the bureaucracy of the ATA would be the people who developed the new curriculum, and they would be well paid for doing so. Mr. Kinney tore that up, and they were very disappointed. Money and prestige had gone away from them. And then, of course, there's the Faculty of Education. But to understand the faculty of education, you'd better understand something else. Who's heard of John Dewey? How many of you went to a school that used the Dewey Decimal System? Hey, there's a big dude. Would you believe he did most of his work in the 1890s? He's kind of dated, isn't he? Well, he didn't really get fully adopted until the 40s and 50s. And the reason is that he made a happy mistake. He misread an ancient writer called Plato to mean that children actually know absolutely everything. Everything. All you have to do is pull it out of them by helping them to explore their environment. You need to be a guide on the side rather than a sage on the stage. And what this means is that educational methods became a field of study as important as mathematics or literature. Because before we had what we called the normal school, it was sort of like training a plumber or electrician. We took people who'd gotten some university, we trained them to be teachers. It was done at SAIT, actually. Well, under the new schema, though, this justified a faculty of education, not even a department. A faculty is like a little university. There's a dean, there's multiple department chairs, there are staff galore just to support it. There is money and prestige abounding. Because skills are key. And so our traditional curriculum, or what passes for traditional here, it's 50 years old or so, is the skill-based curriculum. And Kenny had a different idea. He'd read E.D. Hirsch, that's one of his books there on the screen. Hirsch is the sort of guy who wires electrodes up to your head to see what happens when you learn things. And Hirsch demonstrated quite convincingly with dozens of schools that if you simply force feed the kids actual content, their scores just improve remarkably. Their ability to learn gets better. It's in much the same way that if you want a cat to get better with its claws, you buy it a scratching post. Same principle, really. And for Hirsch, content is king. And so what Mr. Kenny was attempting to do was a Hirschian reform, a content-based curriculum. And so that's why the faculties of education lined up to shout him down. And their allies in the ATA, likewise, although they had their own reasons for pecuniary interest. So that's what it's about. This is about ambition. And I'm afraid to tell you, this is coming back. We're going to have more debates over curriculum in the near future. And then there's this argument people are making, particularly children's advocates, so self-proclaimed sometimes, saying that, well, no, you shouldn't tell parents when a kid transitions socially, because the child has a right to privacy. Let me translate that argument. What they're really saying is, I, as an agent of the state, shall exercise the rights of the child against the parent. Now, if you read our treaties like the UN Declaration on Human Rights, you will find that they foresee the parent exercising the rights of the child against the state. What these people are doing is pure subversion. It is, again, political pornography. They're using the image of the children to get power and prestige for themselves. In fact, the ATA has a legal document on their website. Well, it's a piece of legal advice telling teachers that in old times, teachers acted in loco parentis as agents of the parents, but now they act in parens patriae, that is, as agents of the state. It's the same sort of status that's given to prison guards. That does remind me of my junior high school, mind you. And more importantly, to the social worker who seizes children from a home. That reminds me, we do sometimes extinguish a parent's custodial rights in the case of abuse. But we do it with great soul searching, don't we? And a very open and transparent process in the courts. But the people who are saying, oh, children have the right to privacy, are using that to say they don't have to have an open and transparent process, that they can extinguish your rights without due process. They are simply out of line. Let's move on. You know, $1.1 million from the AT, those are beginner's numbers in this game. Take Calgary's Future. It was a collection of public service unions that made a third-party advertiser. Calgary's Future, they put together $1.7 million, and that buys a lot of future, I gotta tell you. They endorsed people for every seat on council, they endorsed someone for mayor, they endorsed someone for every seat on the public school board. And nobody that they didn't endorse got on. Wow. The ATA wasn't alone. Health Services also spent some money in 2021. And I cannot help but notice that under the NDP's constitution, any union can have a seat on the provincial council, and the NDP will not disclose what unions have a seat. In fact, their Labour caucus elects 2 members to their executive of 7 people. 2 seats. The leader has 1 of the 7 seats. That tells you how powerful the unions are in the ATA. And so when I say that it sometimes seems like the NDP have used our school boards as a farm team, I say that in the sense that the Harlem Globetrotters once came to my high school, and that was a farm team game. We got dunked on pretty hard. So let's talk about what you can do. Let's talk about advocating for your children, educational pluralism, and local elections. So, advocating for your children. There's some things I need to tell you about. And the first is that advocacy starts with a respectful relationship. If the first time you're talking to your children's teacher is to complain about something, or to tell them your political ideals, you are not going to advocate effectively for your children. What I'm going to tell you is really a very simple piece of advice. It's stolen from social work. What you need is unconditional positive regard. And the simplest route there is to look at that person that you're interacting with, get her to talk for a bit, and find a reason to like her. There is no substitute for this. It will color all of your interactions. And try to find a way to help that person with what they're doing. You can be funny about it. You can make suggestions. You can offer to bring resources or hunt things down for them. But often, we don't get our way. And sometimes you're going to have to escalate things to the next level. Now, the way you do that is that you never, ever make a threat. Not implied, not at all. What you do say is, if I can't get that resolved here, I'm going to have to take that to the next level, which is to the principal, then to the area educational lead, and then to the superintendent's office, and from there to the minister. And you need to explain that to them before you close the discussions. Give them one last chance to come back to you with something before you escalate. But once having said that you will escalate, you must follow through, or no one will ever believe you again. So these are the basic techniques of advocacy. Let's move on. I'm going to talk very briefly about the pillars of educational pluralism, the pillars of choice, if you will. So, in the first place, Alberta is the poster child for selection in education. We have public schools. The public schools often, as Calgary does, have many, many special programs. We have Catholic schools, same deal. We also have our private schools, our charter schools, and various shades of home education, in addition to francophone schools. That's a lot of choice. But sometimes it isn't quite as much choice as we think. You see, it isn't enough to slap a cross on a school and say that that's a Christian school. One of the funnier things that ever happened to me was the fellow who was the chair for religious education for Calgary Catholic back in the 90s had his religious education program sent back to him by the province. And they said, "This is too Catholic. Please redo it with a focus on world religions." And you certainly can't say that one of them is better than another. We go farther than that. Section 35.1 of the Education Act. If a single child asks for it, there shall be a gay-straight alliance in your school. It shall be called a gay-straight alliance. Sorry, statement of faith? No, you don't get to say that. Islamic school? No, you've got to have a gay-straight alliance. We don't care if it's inconsistent with your religion. We definitely need to have an exemption, at least for the religious schools, for that one. And while we're at it, talking about having those schools, maybe we'd better talk about finance. Our current funding documents, it's 209 pages of doublespeak. They're hiring grant writers to be able to manage their schools for the year just to get through our funding document. Oh, and guess what? Those big jurisdictions, they can hire better grant writers and more of them, and they can game the system. Oh, we could possibly code this child and that child and get extra funding for them. We'll say that we're doing something for them, we'll do a token, but we won't actually spend the money on it. Instead, we'll hire more DEI consultants. Okay? And then there's the curriculum. Now, I disagree with Mr. Hirsch on one thing. Mr. Hirsch would have us completely fill that curriculum so there isn't one spare minute of the day. But I think we need to make a little room, a little time, for local interests. Right? A farming community out near Cardston is not going to have the same interests as downtown Calgary. And those religious schools are going to have a different perspective than the public schools. We need to make room in that curriculum for it. And finally, We need to ensure that parental authority is respected. When a school says they're going to do a seminar on consent in sexual relations, and then they do that consent form for the parents as an opt-out, they're blowing the whole sexual consent thing. Because if people who are at a party do sexual consent as an opt-out, that consists of the man saying, but she didn't say no. So we have to end the hypocrisy on that at least. So move on. Local elections. You know, those unions have a lot of power. But they have power because we don't vote. Give me a show of hands. How many of you voted in the last school election? Be honest now. You are very unusual people. Most rooms I talk to don't even know the name of their school trustee. And that's just the truth. And that's on us. That's on us to get engaged. But not entirely. A big part of the reason we don't vote is we don't know who we're voting for. Because honest to goodness, those campaigns are so bad, right? This constituency association that I'm addressing, they would be embarrassed if they ever mounted campaigns like we do for school board. Let's face it, okay? And if we mount a good campaign and if people come out, we're going to find that the unions can only bring out so many people and nobody else in the world wants to vote for them. We do not want the unions in power. Any well-run campaign is going to win. And that's the simple truth of it. And I'm going to address one thing to those of you who are in charters or whose children are in charter schools, private schools, or home educated. You have the right to run for school board, let alone the right to vote. People often get confused on this. Don't be confused. And not only do you have the right to run for school board or to vote, but you need to do it. So let's move on. Okay? So I want you to support Parents for Choice in Education. And I want you to do it in a number of ways. Now, first off, we're going to be doing more training on local elections. That image is the textbook for the course. We typically do Friday evening on how to be a good trustee and how to find someone who would be a good candidate for school trustee. Saturday mornings is electioneering, and Saturday afternoons is talking about issues and what you're going to talk about on the campaign trail. We also spend a little time coaching people on advocacy, whole groups sometimes, and we do a lot of writing. If you go out to our table out in the lobby, you'll find a whole stack of literature on different issues, and you'll find a sign-up sheet for our regular newsletter, which comes out roughly quarterly. We don't usually email people unless we've got something to say. So I'd encourage you to go do that. We're supported by people like you. We don't get our money from corporations or from the government. And above all, I want you to remember to get involved in politics. You're doing the right thing coming here and getting involved with a political party. Because you're doing more than voting. You're actually getting out, and that's what counts. And I'd like you to do that now with the school boards too. Thank you very much, folks.
me 7 minutes. Kent, ATA. Let's go to the next slide. John, you know, it's interesting. Your talk is full of humor, but also truths that we're trying to get through. And I was expecting, when I put out this call for the event tonight, that I would get hundreds and hundreds of emails, and that those emails would be across a broad section of interests, and that they would be satisfying. I got three questions. They're all for John. So let's go ahead to question period. Some are here. Keep going, keep going, keep going. We'll come to that. One more. There you go. Okay, here we go. So there's, just by the way, Rob and Blaine, Global TV will be waiting for you when you go out the door. Just a heads up, so you guys are ready to go out there together. Okay.
Ron.
I'm just trying to prepare everybody for what's about to happen. The CBC did not call. I just want you all to know they had no interest in you. I'm just saying. So, John, here's the three questions. First of all, are you involved in advising the government on upcoming parental rights legislation?
Not directly.
You ought to grab that mic. Yeah. It's a good mic, but very good.
Well, we're not directly or formally involved, but I get the feeling that they sometimes read our columns.
Well, when I was at the AGM, you were at the AGM, I thought that there was a certain vindication for Parents for Choice in Education with the overwhelming support that the UCP members had for parental rights. Did you not get that feeling?
I certainly did, and I'm happy to say that I did help to draft some of those motions.
Yeah, so I guess one of the points that I want to make about Calgary Lougheed, and a lot of people ask me this question and they don't think it's true. Our idea in Calgary Lougheed is to engage the community in meaningful ways, and we see it not only inside the borders of Calgary Lougheed, but across the city, Alberta. We want to be that opportunity to be an advocate for those policies of the party that so many of our members have voted for. But we also have this sense of accountability. And the Premier will know I've asked her questions that are sharp and to the point. I once interviewed her for 90 minutes and asked her 62 questions. Some of you might have seen that. But the question really is, how can we hold the government accountable to actually follow through with the legislation?
Well, the first step, of course, is that some of you are on the actual constituency association, and the rest of you know some people on that constituency association. And you have the ability to sit your MLA down, that's Mr. Eric Bouchard, and say, Mr. Bouchard, we want you to go and talk with the Premier and with the Education Minister. And this is what we want you to tell them about. And that's the first thing that you get to do. And that's pretty darn direct. The next thing that you get to do is you get to go to the annual general meeting, and a surprisingly small number of people can put together a proposal for that meeting, a policy proposal, and if it is well written and well argued, it can win.
And we did.
Oh yes, you certainly did.
And just so everyone knows, we have representatives today from Calgary Southeast here. We have Calgary Buffalo, Calgary Mountain View, Calgary Fish Creek, Calgary Curry, Calgary Northwest. We have people from Highwood that are here. So again, appealing broadly is important because we do not operate in silos. If I've heard anything from all the speakers, from Blaine to Kim to Torry to John, is that by educating yourself, by engaging and asking questions, you are doing something valuable for your children. Okay? The real point is the responsibility for being a parent is the parents. It's not the states, it's the parents. But if you abdicate your rights to the ATA, or you abdicate your rights to other government agencies, then you are at fault and you need to be held accountable. And this is what happens when we don't vote. It's the same, similar, not the same, it's a similar situation. We don't engage because we don't like the loud person, we don't like the quiet person, we don't like the person who has an opinion that's not mine, we don't like. But your point on advocacy is you need to learn and understand, work with people, have a community, have the conversations one at a time. So do you have any suggestions for how to approach teachers who insist on sneaking gender ideology into their teaching?
Well, unfortunately, if they really insist on doing it, it's very hard to stop them. Very hard. The principal can't tell them not to use the PRISM toolkit, right? Nobody really can. But I do have an evil plot for you if you want.
A conspiracy theory. Please, go ahead.
Well, it's not a theory at all.
Oh,
It's
so
just straight up conspiracy.
Okay, so it's not a historical reenactment?
So here's the conspiracy. Frequently, the same teacher who is trying to slip the weird stuff in is teaching both social studies and English literature. Now, the school is paid based on the number of butts and seats on September 30th. And supposing you were to opt your child out of social studies and English literature, maybe you decided that you were going to do it at home because you can make that arrangement to teach just some of your subjects at home. Or if you're really going to be mean to them, you say, we're going to do this by distance education with a different school board. And someone else will teach social studies and literature. And you make that decision on September, say, 29th. And all your friends make that decision on September 29th. Then the school principal is walking through the school and checking in the classrooms, and then, why is only a third of the class in your classroom, ma'am? I have no idea. So you go in as a principal and you go and you check your numbers and you find out two things. First, all those kids transferred out to do those specific two classes by distance education. And secondly, in the funding manual, when a child takes two classes by distance education, the school that they're otherwise going to loses funding by that amount, and it's transferred to the other school.
So you're talking technique, not conspiracy theory.
Pure evil, actually.
Okay, just check.
Because I'm pretty sure that things aren't going to go well for that teacher when reviews come up.
So the point is engagement. It's a point of action and it's a point of advocacy. And you can use the gentle hand or you can use something more like a stick. And at some point in time, John pointed out there was levels of escalation. And you have to not be afraid of it, but you also have to be effective with it. Okay? You will exhaust yourself if you don't do it properly, but there are a great number of resources for people who want to know how to go through the process.
Quite so. A couple of years ago, actually, a pair of parents in one school district came to me with this problem about the weird parental consent notice that went out for the seminar on sexual consent for their students. And they weren't making any headway with the principal or district, so we made fun of them in print, and that eventually got some action. And in fact, that may be reflected in some of the Premier's proposed policies to do with opt-in consent.
That's a good idea. So here's a little task for you if you're a parent or a grandparent. Suggest to your son or daughter who happens to have the kids in school. For those of you who are viewing at home, think of it this way. Ask to tour the school with the principal and count the number of Canadian flags. Okay? I'm just saying. We have a customer in our store who came in the other day, and obviously he knew about the parental rights town hall, and he says, you know, I had the most fascinating experience in my daughter's school, and she's in grade 4. Okay, so that's elementary, I guess, elementary school. And I said, well, what happened? He says, well, I went around and I counted the number of flags with the principal. And there were 4 Canadian flags in the school. There's 600 kids, okay? And there's 35 pride flags. So, simple observation on your part also brings the attention to what sort of things should have symmetry. And I'm not suggesting that there shouldn't be pride flags. I'm just saying that the symmetry and the disproportionate balance between that is something that you as a parent and grandparent should engage. And it's easy because it's visual. Curriculum, much more complicated. But the idea of that creeping conversation, those sidebar, anecdotal curriculum items that come in there, you really have to be careful. So I'd just like you all to thank all of our guests that are here tonight. Blaine Badiak, thank you for being here. Torry Tanner, Tim McBride, and John Hilton-O'Brien. Thank you all for coming tonight. 2 announcements, just in case you hadn't signed the recall Gondak petition. We will have a number of people outside in the lobby awaiting your signatures. If you need a list of reasons, just ask my wife. She has it down to a science now. In fact, she starts with, so, which one of these 13 appeals to you? And wouldn't you know, most people under the first 5 or 8 or 10, well, this one, oh, this one. The menorah, that got me. Oh, the napkin ban. Oh, I can go anywhere and build an 8-plex. By the way, I really like that one because I have a really big lot. So we're going to build like a 12-plex. And I'd like to say my house is right next to Gondak's, but it's not. But wouldn't it be cool to buy the properties on both sides and build up? Just a thought. I mean, going back to your conspiracy. So there's that. Am I missing anything else? Oh, Kent, ATA. So the moral of the story is something I want you to read. This is the book right here. It's called The Linger, Rails, and Combustons. It's $20. It's a brilliant work of fiction. There's no pornography in this book, I will tell you. But it is intriguing. I encourage you to get it from Brendan. Brendan's back there. You can buy them for him. He is a veteran, a military veteran, who stood up for his rights and was abruptly kicked out. So we all know what the implication of that means. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for supporting Calgary Lockheed.